Our Bible word is Genesis 2 verse 7. And the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. In today's Bible word, we will see how words change in meaning or get added meaning as time goes by. So the way a Bible word was understood when it was originally written is different to the way it was understood at the time of Jesus in the early church. And we'll see how this development took place with this Bible verse, for example. Now, overall context, let's first see this. Of course, Genesis opens where God creates order from chaos. That's in chapters 1 to 2. And from the rest of chapter 2, that's from verse 4 to 24, that's where it speaks of Adam and Eve's priestly role in the sacred space. This is where God creates man. The Hebrew word Adam, it means literally God created the earthling, or mankind is a more broader, nuanced meaning. Understand that in the first 4 chapters of Genesis, the Hebrew word Adam, it does not really refer to a person with the name of Adam. It refers to the earthling. God created the earthling. In other words, someone who was made of earth, a reddish earth. And in a sense, Adam refers to this earthling, or mankind, human beings, etc. So, God created Adam and Eve. First, He created man, Adam. Then later on we read it that God took the half of Adam, the earthling, and created the woman. And they lived in paradise, and God gave them a priestly role. They must tend the garden, they must look after the garden, etc. So that's our more immediate context. That's Adam and Eve's priestly role in a sacred space. So now if we look at our Bible word, we see there, and the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath, the Hebrew neshama, of life. And man became a living being, or we can maybe say a living soul, in Hebrew nephesh. In other words, when God breathed into this earthling, he became this breathing entity, this living entity. It's a ground or earth that can breathe or is alive. And those words, neshama and nephesh, in Hebrew, they are very similar in meaning. There are 3 words in Hebrew that we can look at. That's neshama, nephesh, and ruach. And they all 3 mean breath. But there's also other nuanced meanings attached to each word. Nephesh can also be translated as life or as soul. Ruach can also be translated as life or wind or spirit. So we understand here there's this essentially meaning of breath, but all the other kind of meanings associated with wind or air, spirit, life. It was all associated with this act of breathing here in Genesis and also in the Old Testament. And what these words refer to, or this neshama, or this nephesh, or ruach, it refers to a God-given life force. It's God that gives us breath to a human being. And so he becomes basically a piece of earth that can breathe, a piece of earth that's molded as a human but is now a living being or a living, breathing entity. And it refers to earthly, mortal life. Importantly, understand at this stage, there was no idea of life after death. Here it refers to, I'm a clump of earth brought together, molded by God. God has given me the breath, the divine breath into me, and now I can breathe. And now I'm a living being. That's what it means. And so it's ground or earth, plus the breath, the soul, the nefesh or the ruach or the neshama. It equals a living being. That's what makes you alive. And if you take that breath away, you're no longer a living being, and you return to ground, or being ground and earth. So that's the meaning here. It does not refer to life after death. It refers to earthly, mortal life. Life in the flesh. Because while you're alive, you breathe. And when you die, you lose this ability to breathe. The life that's within you. This God-given life force that God has given you. You die and then you're back to being dust, earth, ground, etc. Now this breath is not reserved for human beings alone. It's also in animals. If you go read there in Ecclesiastes 3 verses 19 to 21, we can read there, "For what happens to the sons of men also happens to animals. One thing befalls them, as one dies, so dies the other. Surely they all have one breath, ruach, which is synonymous to nefesh, etc. Man has no advantage over animals, for all is vanity. All go to one place. All are from the dust, and all return to dust." So we can see how the author of Ecclesiastes is quite cynical about life. All is vanity, all is vapor, so to speak. You're here today, you're gone tomorrow, etc. And there's no life after death. The breath, the ruach, or the nefesh that we have as humans is also with animals. They die, we die. We're here today, we're gone tomorrow. We're just like the animals. All is vanity. And that's most of the Old Testament. There's no hope of life after death. If we also go to the Psalms, we also get this notion of that there's no life after death. If we go to Psalm 6 verse 5, "For in death there is no remembrance of you. In the grave, who will give you thanks?" And many other passages like this in the Old Testament. Once you die, essentially you cease to exist. The Rephahim or the shades, these feeble versions of you go to the underworld, but there you can't really do much. It was also believed that this nefesh, or this life, was in the blood. If you go to Genesis 9 verses 4, "But you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is its blood." So it was understood that this life force, this nefesh, or the ruach, or whatever it may be, it's God imparted in blood. So blood was understood as a holy substance. It was used in the sacrifices of atonement, etc. You should not eat blood, even the blood of animals at all, because that's where the life force is. This nefesh, this life force, this breath, this that God has given all living things. Now, around the 3 centuries before the time of Jesus, development in understanding took place. There was new layers of meaning added to this life force, how it was understood. Coming into contact with Greek civilization, the Greeks had the idea of a soul, or as you could pronounce it in Greek, psyche. Some will say suche, some will say psyche. Depends on how you want to pronounce it. And this is a part of a person that continued to exist after death. And this idea of life continues after death, now it started entering into Jewish thought from 300 BC onwards. Like in Apocalypse, it appears, like 1 Enoch. In Daniel, that's written at this time, the idea of a resurrection of the dead also comes into the fore. There is life after death. The grave is not the end. And the Old Testament was translated into Greek. And if you see there on screen, the NAC-SA, that stands for the Septuagint, or the Greek translation of the Old Testament, as well as the New Testament. The word nefesh was translated as the Greek psyche, soul, as we understand it today. Also the word pneuma, spirit, was also gained this meaning. So in the Greek translation of the Old Testament, as well as the New Testament, these words psyche or pneuma, soul and spirit, that's derived from that nephesh and ruach, it retains its old meaning of this God-given breath or this life force. It refers to life, this mortal life. But it gains an added meaning in terms of it now refers to your spiritual aspect. That soul or spirit is now understood as part of a person that continues to exist after death. So it just doesn't refer to this breath, this life force that you have. It refers to the soul, that part of you who is continuously God-breathed, so to speak. It's God continues to give life to you even after death. But now as a soul, or it's your soul, that part of you that continues to exist after death. So we flesh and spirit or soul. There's this dual aspect to our nature. In the beginning, when the Genesis was written, of course, it just meant the life force, the breath that you lost, when you returned to dust. But before the time of Jesus, at the time of the early church, it gained this new meaning. That it's also, this is the soul. And it doesn't disappear when you die. You continue to be this living, breathing entity, not breathing entity, but a living entity who continues to exist after death. So understand that. There was a development in thought. If you don't say there's life after death, then you're a bit like the Sadducees, because they didn't accept this development in thought. All other Jews did. Jesus did. The apostles did. The followers of even the Pharisees believed in this aspect. The soul continues to exist. Most Jews believed in it. And we can see also Paul, he looks at this when he's brought before the council, and there's the Sadducees and the Pharisees. And he says, well, I believe in the resurrection of the dead, that's why I'm on trial. And so these two groups starting to clash. The Sadducees, no, there's no life after death, there's no soul or spirit or whatever. And so they fight with the Pharisees. So if you deny that, you're a bit like the Sadducees. There is life after death, and we can see how this development took place in Jewish thought. So remember, when Genesis, or this Genesis 2 verses 7 was written, it meant one thing. In the time of the early church, and when the New Testament was written, this idea of nephesh, or being alive, or being ruach, the spirit, the spiritual aspect developed, where it referred to you, or that part of you that continues to exist after death.